Hey guys, my name is Chad Barnier. Welcome to my YouTube channel. It's been quite some time since I've made a video. I think it was last year's Tony Awards that I last made a video, which reminds me, the Tony Awards are coming up very soon and I should make a video about that. So, got to put that one on the list. So I'm obsessed, a little bit ridiculously so, with musical theatre. I adore it. I think it's a beautiful art form. I think it is an incredible way to tell a story. Every day, all I ever do is listen and talk about musical theatre. But until recently, I never really had like a crew or a group of friends that were also into musical theatre. I didn't go to drama school. A lot of my friends growing up and as an adult were very music based. I played in a band for a very long time, but we were into pop music or rock music. So for me, getting into musicals, I was kind of exploring that world on my own. And so I thought I would make a quick video on how you can get into musical theatre, how you can enjoy musicals and discover them for yourself and what kind of resources are out there. This video is obviously operating under the assumption that you have access to the internet. You're watching this right now, so I assume you either have a phone or a computer or you're borrowing someone else's phone or computer. If not, libraries are a pretty fantastic place to connect to Wi-Fi and also a great place to hire books. The first thing is the internet is absolutely your friend. A lot of my musical theatre fanaticism comes from me digging into it and sinking my teeth into it on the internet. Wikipedia is an absolutely amazing resource. I know for me, unless a musical is completely sung through like Hamilton or like Les Miserables or something, it can be quite hard to understand the context of songs without the story accompanying them. I know for Dear Evan Hansen, for example, I looked up on Wikipedia and listened to it at the same time, so I can kind of see what story had happened by the time the next song came around, and that made a whole lot more sense. And I know I've done that with a few musicals. Stephen Sondheim's Company I did that with. That helped a lot. It can be a bit confusing if you don't know what the story is. Backing off of the internet point, music streaming services are amazing. Spotify for me is kind of how I listen to 99% of musicals. They have an awesome recommended feature, so if you like one musical, it might recommend others by that composer or people who listen to this also listen to. And they've recently added a really great feature called song credits. Right mouse click on any song and there's an option that says song credits and it'll say who was involved in writing or making the song, and usually clicking on that will take you through a whole rabbit hole of other musicals. So let's say it's Hamilton, you right mouse click and it says Lin-Manuel, or it might say any of the guys involved in that, Alex Lacamoire, and then Alex Lacamoire might have been involved with this thing over here, and they can create a whole spider web of musicals to kind of get into. One thing I'd recommend is create your own playlists of things that you are into or things that you want to start listening that other people have recommended or you found on the internet. I actually created a bunch of playlists on Spotify based on collaborators or composers. So if I'm into one thing, I can kind of put a Pasek and Paul playlist on shuffle and it'll come up with something that I haven't heard before. I might have got into them with Dear Evan Hansen, but then it pops up with Edges or pops up with other things inside of their kind of repertoire. Another thing is definitely join some online musical theatre communities. So places like Reddit or Facebook groups, or even some YouTube comment sections. I know that's a dangerous place to find yourself, have really helped me in discovering new musicals. So I know on Reddit, the subreddit r/musicals, I think that's how you kind of talk about Reddit in speech. You can go on there and ask questions like, hey, I really love Rent. Does anyone recommend anything along those lines? Or I'm really into Stephen Sondheim, but I only know the main Sondheims, like the popular ones. Can you recommend something else? And people are usually really, really great at recommending and helping out and encouraging. There are some great Facebook groups around musical theatre as well. Some of them are tied to podcasts, which obviously is another thing I'll talk about. I know there's a bit of a community around playbill swapping, and they get really nerdy with it too, so they know which cast was on this year or that season. So musical theatre communities or forums online are a great place to find other people who are as passionate as you are. So the next thing, and I touched on this in the last point, is podcasts. This has been massive for me because it feels like having a friend to talk to a little bit. Like they're kind of talking straight to you about musicals. Not that it's kind of one-sided conversation, but you know what I mean? It's kind of like someone's talking it out with you. So there's so many podcasts that I recommend when it comes to musical theater. It's like 36 Questions, which is incredible. It's a 3-act musical that's done completely in audio form. And it's just amazing. So check that out. Musicals Taught Me Everything I Know. Talk about musicals, the casts, the songs, the history of the musical. They usually have a guest on who has starred in that musical or stars in other musicals. That's really great because it really gets you into the bones of a musical and the why and how it was created, which helps it kind of stick in your head. So I know for me, Avenue Q, I love that musical, but I didn't know too much about it. But listening to their episode of that, or listening to the episode of, say, like Into the Woods or Sweeney Todd, it really helps me understand it. So when I listen to it, I get it, and it really kind of buries itself inside of my brain. There's another one called Everything is Rent. So this is more tailored just to the musical Rent by Jonathan Larson. That's awesome. Rent's one of my favorites. And there's another one called Putting It Together, which is all about Stephen Sondheim musicals. The host talks about Stephen Sondheim musicals one song at a time and goes through all of one musical, then do another one. So I think they've done Gypsy, and I forget which one they're working through at the moment, but it's really fun. Another option to get your kind of audio fix of musicals is musical vinyl. I actually collect musical theatre vinyl. I've got a whole stack of them over here. It can be a bit hard because not all musicals do a vinyl release, but it's a really tactile option. I like it because you typically don't listen to a single song. You wouldn't skip to Defying Gravity because it's kind of in the middle of a bunch of songs, and doing that on vinyl can be a bit tricky. So you would listen to that whole side, and it introduces you to the songs either side of that hit song. So vinyl's a really great way to really discover the whole album, or at least sections of an album at a time, instead of going, oh no, I like Waving Through a Window. So I've got a bunch of really fantastic books, and there's a few more over here. This is a bit of a classic, and it's a 3-book series. It's the Stephen Sondheim Hatbox Collection. This is Stephen Sondheim Look, I Made a Hat. It's the collected lyrics from his shows between 1981 to 2011. Stuff about songs that didn't make the shows, about particular lyrics and why they made the shows, different versions. Talks about the collaborators, or this line didn't work for this actress, and it's really quite cool. Handwritten notes. Definitely get your hands on those. They're fantastic. This Hamilton book, whether you're a fan of Hamilton or not, I know some people like to just be a bit contrarian and hate anything that's popular. This is quite phenomenal. It's got all the lyrics to the show, really fantastic images, and actually it's gorgeous paper stock as well. But there's notes along every song about a particular rhyming couplet, or about Andy Blankenbuehler, the choreographer, or the set design. It's a really gorgeous look at the detail that goes into an epic show like this, and I think anyone would appreciate the craftsmanship and the artistry that has gone into it, and the attention to detail. This one I really like. This is called Broadway Musical Show by Show, and I think they do a few updated versions. This is the 8th edition. Essentially, it's kind of every show, kind of ever on Broadway, including like who it's by and the cast, and a little bit of a synopsis. That's a great book. It's almost like an encyclopedia, I guess. I was actually talking to my nan, who in the 60s had the opportunity to go to New York for a little while, and she was talking to me that she saw a show. She wasn't too sure like what it was, but she knew who was in it, and I could look it up in here and actually remind her of the show and talk about it. And that was like a really beautiful thing to kind of have the opportunity to do, because I know a lot of people might see something and they might not have that kind of common experience of seeing it or knowing it, and so it's a cool way to kind of bridge that gap. Another one here is Words with Music, which is quite beautiful. I'm working my way through that one at the moment, and kind of highlighting passages that are relevant to me writing a musical, because that's something I want to do. And the same goes with this one here, How Musicals Work by Julian Wolford. That's quite cool as well. There's another one I have, which is a really gorgeous look at Broadway musicals and all the reviews from the New York Times. I'll find that. Give me a sec. So that's this one here. It might be a little bit overexposed. The sun is a bit different today. So that is stunning. So it's all of the original New York Times reviews from shows. So Follies, 1920, or it's like, it goes all the way back. Got West Side Story from the 50s. Really, really cool. So I went through and looked at all my favorites, so like Rent and a whole bunch of things like that. And it was kind of cool to hear about the zeitgeist at the time of how they were thinking about musical theater. Because I know for me, I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, and I go, cool, I like this musical just because, and it resonates with me. But to hear what the people in the musical theater community felt about a musical at a particular time. So some musicals came back to quite a skeptical reception from critics, or some really were well loved, but now have kind of fallen out of fashion. That's a really cool thing to know about musicals as well. So there's that one. Broadway Musicals by Ben Brantley. So another thing is musical movies. Honestly, I think anything that sparks joy and passion about musicals is an awesome thing and should be embraced, whether you think they do a good job in it or not. So musical movies are exactly how they sound. They're typically kind of feature length, either an adaptation of a musical, or they're an original musical that doesn't happen too much anymore. Even things like Disney, Lion King and Aladdin, all that kind of stuff, they fall under that wider umbrella of musicals. And that was probably my introduction into, and most people's introduction into musicals originally. It was the animated musicals. But things like Grease and the movie versions of West Side Story are a great way to get into it. Maybe you don't have access to a local theater. You can just jump online onto Netflix or Stan or Hulu or any of those services, and you might be able to find some. I know they're few and far between on the streaming services. They're not super popular, so you can usually only find a couple, but definitely worth checking out. And I guess on the topic of viewing musicals, not just listening to them, live musicals. So that would be things like Rent Live or Jesus Christ Superstar Live. These are productions that they do straight to TV. So they're still typically big productions that most of the time will have proper casts. They usually they cast some pop stars for some star power. This is essentially musical theater trying to attract a new audience that aren't typically just musical people. So like a pop audience, so they might cast, like John Legend was in Jesus Christ Superstar, and they're a great kind of in. I know they get a lot of flack online, like Rent Live this year. A lot of people didn't like it. I personally loved it. I've seen a whole bunch of other people online saying, oh my gosh, that was my first experience of a musical. What else can I get into? And it kind of sparks that inspiration to kind of get into a new medium that you love, which I think is amazing. So I love that. So something I touched on at the top of the video is that a lot of my friends weren't into musicals. And so it was a lot of the time it was me looking and kind of having to explore and journey into this world like unaccompanied, you know what I mean? So one thing I definitely recommend, and it can be a little bit awkward and a little bit kind of confronting, is to go to the theater by yourself. If you don't have friends you can go with, I'm fortunate that where I live in Sydney, Australia, we have a whole bunch of really fantastic theaters that put on regular productions. And so I actually keep a musical theater calendar that I put in all the productions that I come across. So I would go by myself, and I go a little bit early so I can kind of hang in the lobby and maybe chat to some people. And it was really awkward the first few times, and I kind of hated it. I was really nervous. But now I've met and made a whole bunch of new friends that now go to the theater with me, or discuss theater with me, or recommend me new shows that I should be listening to. And it makes such a difference to that theater experience to have someone that you can enjoy it with, and that helps a lot. So if you have a theater nearby, or maybe there's like a local community group that like just does sing-along nights, or does a cabaret show, anything like that you can get along to. I know a lot of schools do productions, and they're actually surprisingly good a lot of the time. So you can go along to a school production if it's open to the public. I can't overstate just how awesome it is to have real life people in your circle that also enjoy the things that you enjoy. Oh, and before I finish up, another thing is blogs. There are blogs on websites like Playbill that also have a great YouTube channel that talk about musicals and the top 5 musicals like this one, or musicals for fans of this. There are also just fan-run blogs, people creating content on YouTube, like this video, I guess. And there are a whole bunch of really great bloggers and YouTubers out there who are creating content to encourage people to get into musical theater, whether that's in writing musicals or performing in musicals, or just being a part of the crew and the team that helps put on a musical. And so I'll link some of my favorites below. There's some really great people out there, and you should definitely check them out. But I guess that kind of wraps up my very on the spot, off the top of my head list of ways that you can kind of get into musicals or enjoy the theater without necessarily growing up a theater kid or going to drama school and having all these influences readily available to you. So if you have access to the internet or a local library, you can enjoy musicals just as much as anyone else.